All right, good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us at the Unitarian Universalist Fellowship of Pottstown. This morning, after a holiday that reminds us to be grateful for the gifts we've been giving, we are once again carving out sacred space in our hearts and in our houses. We're once again reminded of the blessings of care and community that allow us to gather even though we cannot gather in person. We have music today that's played by the lovely Carly Shell, and we'd like to send a shout out to Rick Dusky for being our technology lead today. Thank you guys so much. For over 50 years, the UUFP has been a liberal religious voice in the Pottstown area. As UUs, we believe that reason and wonder can coexist, that we can honor the teachings of those who've gone before, even as we explore our way into the future, and that no one is outside the circle of justice and compassion. We hope your spirit, your heart, and your mind are refreshed as we commit ourselves once again to our 7 guiding principles. We come together this Sunday morning and every Sunday morning, not because we share a creed, but because we share a promise to support one another on our spiritual journeys. Our services are different each week, but the loving kindness we offer one another in this community remains the same. So whoever you are, wherever you are, whomever you love, we are glad to have you with us today. Am I sharing this as well?
We see the your Behold the Magi title screen.
Okay, good. That's good. All right. So our speaker today is Reverend Charlie Dieterich, retired from the Unitarian Universalist Congregation of, sorry, my screen is cut off, so let me see that, of Erie, Pennsylvania. Reverend Charlie lives now near Princeton, New Jersey, and we agreed it would be safer to have everybody visit via Zoom today.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Emily. I understand that it's common for you to ring a chime at the beginning of your service to settle the community into a time of worship. Well, this morning is, of course, the first Sunday of the new year, and that calls for one more moment of celebration. Singing in the group is, of course, not allowed, so we ask you to find a bell someplace in your room. See what you can find. Noisemaker of some sort. Maybe it's keys, maybe it's an empty coffee cup as your wild bells to welcome in the new year. Emily and I will first bless all the bells and then invite you to unmute and ring them. All good? Are we good? Got the idea down? Good. Our blessing is a slight adaptation of a poem by Alfred Lord Tennyson called In Memoriam. Ring out wild bells to the wild sky, the flying cloud, the frosty light. The year has died in the night. Ring out wild bells and let it be.
Ring out the old, ring in the new. Ring happy bells across the snow. The year is gone, so let it go. Ring out the false, ring in the true.
Ring out the grief that saps the mind for those that here we see no more. Ring out the feud of rich and poor. Ring in redress to humankind.
Ring out old shapes of foul disease. Ring out the narrowing lust of gold. Ring out the 1,000 wars of old. Ring in the 1,000 years of peace.
Ring in the valiant and the free, the larger heart, the kinder hand. Ring out the darkness of the land. Ring in the love that is to be. And now you may unmute and ring your New Year's bells.
Here, you want to come ring some bells? Fun, huh?
Now, don't forget to mute again. Our chalice lighting words are from our hymnal, and they're
You're muted, Reverend Charlie.
there we go. Everybody got muted, I guess, and I got muted too. Anyway, our chalice lighting words are from our hymnal. They're adapted from the Passover Haggadah. If you have a candle or a chalice at home, uh, you can light your own chalice. I'm going to light one here in my room. May the light we now kindle inspire us to use our powers to heal and not to harm, to help and not to hinder, to bless and not to curse, to serve you, Spirit of freedom. Our service today will use the story from the Greek New Testament, a passage that has been part of Christian storytelling since at least the 3rd century of the Common Era. It's a story of foreigners coming to Bethlehem in Judah, not in Pennsylvania, soon after Jesus was born. The foreigners are called Magi in the New Testament, and that sounds like the Persian word for someone of the intelligentsia or noble birth. Today we may refer to them as magicians. The roots of the two words are the same: astrologers, kings, or simply magi, magi. Later stories say that there are 3 of them and even give them names. The Bible doesn't specify, so you can let your imagination take over. We'll begin by singing our opening hymn, number 259, We Three Kings. And because it's a pretty long one, we won't pause to do the chorus until the last verse. The hymn has words that aren't common. Traverse means to travel across. Nigh means nearby, and both frankincense and myrrh are types of dried tree sap, like amber or like maple sugar candy, that is burned as incense and is used for anointing of kings. Remember that we're all on Zoom, so stay muted, and you can sing as loud as you want while Carly plays. As I understand it, it's a tradition to have a time for all ages at the start of your services. And I love that tradition because it gives me a chance to see all of you and to hear other people's voices, or in this case, their texts. Our topic today is the three kings, or three wise men, or three astrologers, or simply Magi, who saw a special star in the sky and determined that a new king was born in Israel. So they each brought something special to give to the baby Jesus. Today being the first Sunday in 2022, I thought it would be interesting to think about what you would, if you were a magician of sorts, what you would give when you visited a newborn babe. You can give something magical to the newborn baby born in the first days of 2022 as a blessing for them or maybe for their family. What would you give a newborn child if you were a magician? And because we're on Zoom, of course, it would make sense for you to type a word or short phrase in the chat box available at the bottom of the screen, and we'll read those out. If you want to say something like Chris M says, then sign your name in the chat box too, and we'll mention that too. What would you give to a newborn child if you were a magician? Emily, what would you give?
Well, I would give the ability to be a peacemaker. I think it would be wonderful to be someone who could always see a way through a problem that would not involve violence.
Okay.
Oh, Reverend Dave Hunter says democracy.
And Judy McDonald says, I would give the child a gift of curiosity.
What would you give, Cordelia? Oh, Sedona Hall says she would give them the ability to create joy and compassion and empathy in others. That's a lovely gift.
I think I would give them strength to endure through the hard times. Ooh. Miranda says the gift of music.
Cordelia just said she would always give people someone to help them up when they fall down. Oh, and Erica Dusky says good health. That's always important. Ah, Ruby and Chris say kindness to everyone. Kindness to animals from Maddie. Do we have other gifts? Anyone who didn't get a chance yet? Ah, John Dreesen, gift of great happiness.
Ooh, the ability to love and respect others. And compassion and joy.
The ability to laugh at themselves and the gift of humility.
Wonder if the gift of singing would be a great thing. Because I think people who sing somehow see the world differently. Well, I guess you could spend the whole day thinking about what you would give if you were a magician and met a newborn child and was able to give them a present. Thanks very much for the responses, and Happy New Year. Ooh, give them a doll.
So although we do not have our usual, we're not in person, I'm still going to sing everyone out to class. So go now in peace, go now in peace. May the love of God surround you everywhere, everywhere you may go.
You're muted, Emily.
Sorry about that, technical difficulties getting to the right screen. All right, so now is the time in our service where we think about the fact that all of this that we do together is not free. We need one another to survive, but our bills don't stop when the world slows down. We can't pass the baskets today because the world has thrown us yet another curveball. But there is a donation link on the website, and the donation link is also showing on your screen right now. We welcome you and the gifts you bring to the fellowship, whether they are gifts in money, in time, or in service. And we thank you so much for your generosity. Right. So a sense of community is a sense of community is part of what brings us to this place. And in this time when we can't be together physically, this time of sharing of joys and sorrows is that much more important to keep us feeling connected to one another. If anyone has a joy or a sorrow that they'd like to share today, please unmute and share. If you have trouble unmuting, you can raise your hand either by waving or by hitting the little raise hand button, which is in the top right of your screen, or bottom right, whichever way your screen happens to be set up right now.
All right, this is John. And I have a horrible sorrow to share. We eat at the same restaurant at least once or twice on the weekends. One of the servers, we've come to know them all well, was not there in the weekend after Christmas. And the owner said that there'd been a tragedy. And he said, unfortunately, one of the person's identical twin daughters had hanged herself on Christmas Eve. Obviously, it's a horrible event. One can only imagine the sorrow of it all. The therapist next door had a son who was a classmate of this individual. He was very traumatized and relatively fragile. He did go to the funeral ceremony last week. Many kids came. It was a 2-hour celebration of her life, not the sorrow of her death. The sad part, for any of you who have kids who are watching TikTok, there is apparently I don't know what to call it, but a process of self-strangulation in part, which is supposed to give an erotic high or a high in general. At the funeral service, someone had revealed that they knew that she had been doing this. And the very sad part, not that this makes it any better, is that she may have been trying to do this type of thing. And the game is you have to know when to stop. And she may not have been able to do so and may have then suffocated herself and succumbed. But I've sent a letter of condolence to the parents after soliciting information from several ministers I know, hopefully to do the best I can in some meager, inadequate way. So I would ask you to keep them, without naming anybody, in your hearts and souls. Give your children an extra squeeze. Watch what happens on social media.
That is one of those things that makes life so hard. That social media can be something that keeps us together and lets us connect with people we otherwise would lose track of, but it can also be such a dangerous place that, you know, people find things that are dangerous and they somehow convince themselves that it's safe. And it's a rough thing. It's a rough place to be. So with with that in mind, do we have any other joys or sorrows we'd like to share this morning? Oh, what an
I'll give a
adorable.
joy. I'm aiming this at my Siamese, Eve, who likes to sit on my lap incessantly. So in the face of the horror I just mentioned, let there be joy in the fact of having our lovely animal pets who give joy to our lives just because they're there.
Yeah. Yeah, they don't have to do anything special but exist. Their existence makes us happier. Do we have any other joys or sorrows this morning?
So next we have, thank you so much for sharing and for all the joys or sorrows that we have kept in our hearts. We join together as a caring community. Now I have an anthem, which actually could be sung as a hymn because you're at home and you're on mute. But keeping the theme with the bells, our anthem is based on a poem by Henry Wadsworth Longfellow, written near the end of the Civil War, a period of time when the whole nation was feeling just dragged out. Longfellow wrote, I heard the bells on Christmas Day their old familiar carols play, and wild and sweet the words repeat of peace on earth to all goodwill. And in despair I bowed my head. There is no peace on earth, I said, for hate is strong and mocks the song of peace on earth to all goodwill. Till ringing, singing on its way, the world revolved from day to day, a voice, a chime, a chant sublime of peace on earth to all goodwill. Let's listen to that and maybe sing one of the verses again. May we enter into a time of meditation and silence as we acknowledge the despairing news of 2021 and the possible gifts that the year ahead may bring. Amen. Let's sing Spirit of Life.
Reverend Charlie has selected the story of the Magi from the translation called the Scholar's Version of the Gospel of Matthew. Jesus was born at Bethlehem, Judea, when Herod was king.
Astrologers from the east showed up in Jerusalem just then. Tell us, they said, where the newborn king of the Judeans is. We have observed his star in the east and have come to pay him homage. And when the news reached King Herod, he was visibly shaken, and all Jerusalem along with him. He called together all the ranking priests and local experts and pressed them for information. Where is the anointed supposed to be born?
They replied, "At Bethlehem, Judea. This is how it was put by the prophet. And you, Bethlehem, in the province of Judah, you are by no means the least among the leaders of Judah. Out of you will come a leader who will shepherd my people Israel."
Then Herod called the astrologers together secretly and ascertained from them the precise time the star became visible. Then he sent them to Bethlehem with these instructions: Go and make a careful search for the child. When you find him, report back to me so that I also can go and pay him homage.
They listened to what the king had to say and continued on their way. And there, guiding them on, was the star they had observed in the east. It led them on until it came to a standstill above where the child lay. Once they saw the star, they were beside themselves with joy. And they arrived at the house and saw the child with his mother Mary. They fell down and paid him homage. Then they opened their treasure chests and presented him with gifts: gold, pure incense, and myrrh.
And because they had been advised in a dream not to return to Herod, they journeyed back to their own country by a different route. For our central hymn, I've selected my favorite, number 318 by Samuel Anthony Wright. I wonder if the Magi might have sung a similar song as they traversed the mountains of Judea. I'll read the words and then Carly will play. They go like this. We would be one as now we join in singing our hymn of love, to pledge ourselves anew to that high cause of greater understanding of who we are and what in us is true. We would be one in living for each other, to show to all a new community. We would be one in building for tomorrow a nobler world than we have known today. We would be one in searching for that meaning which bends our hearts and points us on the way. As one, we pledge ourselves to greater service. With love and justice, strive to make us free. Good morning. It's good to see you all, even if it's only virtually this morning. It's good to share music with you, share silence, share smiles, share church. I think of a Sunday morning service as being like a visit to a department store, at least in some ways. In the store, you can try on different things and maybe discover that you like a particular color or style. You might also learn that you've changed size and that you're not the person you were before. Or you may find the same styles you liked in the past, or the styles that a friend has. On Sunday, you can listen not with your wallet, but with your heart. You can pick up and try on ideas, understandings, points of view. These days, our hearts spend a lot of time cooped up for safety. For this hour, let yours out into the world of maybe. This morning, I'm asking you to try on a Christmas story that I created. Your heart might want to look at it from different angles, see whether it fits you or not. And maybe you'll learn what does fit you. That's the magic that is possible on Sunday morning, even if you don't like my fashion sense. In many Christian churches, this is Epiphany Sunday, and this coming week is Epiphany itself, the day the Magi visited the baby Jesus and his mother. So that's our framework for this morning. And I'll begin with a new story. The date is the 10th day of the first summer moon, year 1. The place is Persia, the home of Melchior, one of the 3 astrologers or Magi who visited Judea earlier that year. Also present, his fellow travelers Gaspar and Balthazar. Melchior speaks. Welcome, my friends. It's good that we could get together for dinner again, now that we have resumed our affairs after that long journey. I wonder if we might spend some time reflecting on our recent travels to Judea. Gaspar rises and lifts his glass. Gentlemen, Magi, we have done a wonderful thing. We have followed our religious duty. We have read the signs in the heavens correctly, and seeing the great portent in the star of a star in the house of Judah, we have obeyed our faith by paying homage to the one born King of the Judeans. We prayed at his feet, and the child smiled upon us. Balthazar nods. We have indeed seen the babe, and given fragrant and wonderful gifts to him and his mother. Surely this shall make our way easier in the afterlife and bring credit to our nation. An angel even spoke to me in a dream, telling me which route to take. With eyes downcast, Melchior says, but if we are to be honest, to make a fearless inventory of all that has happened, we must incorporate the news of the events that followed, how the babe's parents had to flee to Egypt, and how other children of Bethlehem were slaughtered by Herod's forces. How do we justify our actions in light of that slaughter? The babe was already born to be king. Our gifts did not make him holy. All we did was stir up Herod's anger, which led to mourning and bitter grieving by the inconsolable women of Bethlehem and the surrounding districts. Looking a bit stunned, Gaspar adds, and the man at the hotel warned us of Herod's temper. He told us how the king had drowned his brother-in-law, killed his wife, he killed 3 of his own sons out of jealousy. But with agitation, Balthazar interjects, but we saw the star. We trusted it. We did what etiquette and our faith required. We went to the palace because that's where the new king of the Judeans should have been. We didn't kill those young boys. It's not our fault. But Melchior adds, well, what's done is done. The question now is, what can we learn from this horrible episode? What could be done differently? Can we work to prevent it from happening again? Gaspar added, my thoughts and prayers are with those poor children. So today's date is the 2nd of January, 2022. Happy New Year to you all. In a few more days, if it hasn't already happened, the creche scenes will be taken down from church lawns, from public places. The ceramic figures of the 3 kings, Joseph and Mary, the shepherds, angels, and maybe a little drummer boy, will be put back in boxes and lifted up into the attic. But before they go, can we spend just a little more time with the Bible? Spend a moment to explore how we, 2,000 years later, can learn from this story, this legend, this bit of oral history. That's my goal today, really. And there are 1,000 stories based on the verses in chapter 2 of the Gospel of Matthew. To tell all the interpretations and legends would fill several doctoral theses. That's not my goal. Today, I am going to concentrate on just one of them. My goal is to take the Bible passage and use it to help understand my world and my life, our world and our life, to help us ponder what can be done in 2022 and what needs to be worked on in the years ahead. For our reading, we read a modern translation from Matthew chapter 2. Most folks telling the Epiphany story will stop at Matthew 2:12 when the kings are leaving by another route. And that makes a kind of a happy story, with a bit of foreboding that King Herod was not happy and probably would be causing trouble. But that's not the end. Trigger warning, this story takes a tragic turn. In the next 6 verses, we learn that Joseph also gets a message from God saying, "Flee to Egypt with Mary and Jesus, save yourselves." And they leave Bethlehem quickly. And King Herod is outraged and sends men to kill all the children under the age of 2 in the greater Bethlehem area. Such a sad story. It's a horrible story. Now, the first reaction that you might have is denial. Say that it never happened. One source which I read says that there's no written history of the death decree, no independent verification that it ever happened. So if nobody saw it, it didn't happen, right? So Matthew simply invented that part to move Joseph and Jesus and Mary off to Egypt because there's an ancient prophecy that said Jesus came out of Egypt. I don't believe that edit at all. If you believe one part of the story, if you believe that the star appeared in the sky, then you have to believe the whole thing. If the kings existed, the slaughter existed. So I'll make it a different question. Can this tragic story tell us anything useful? Or is it just senseless violence? Stories help us make sense of our world and maybe see new possibilities. They can be comforting, or like this one, they can be challenging. For example, when you see the Magi in a nativity scene, what reaction do you have? Do you think about your childhood when you or a friend played a part in a Christmas pageant? Do you feel pride that they came all that way to give gifts to Jesus? Is a goal of world community with respect and love across cultures? Or do you see them as entitled foreigners who came to Judah, made a mess, and then fled? Do you see them as responsible for the deaths of the children? Are they insensitive meddlers? Like those Christian missionaries that we read about recently who attempted to convert indigenous people in the Amazon rainforest? Or were they doing holy work? What's your point of view? Or is your answer, it's both? You know, of course, that near the end of the 19th century, there were groups that gifted statues of Confederate generals to town squares, mostly in the South. To most white folks in the town, it was a nice reminder of valor. Maybe not their personal style, but they could ignore it. But to the African American population, I have learned that having a statue of someone who supported your enslavement is a clear reminder of oppression. And in community after community, the leaders have finally had their consciousness raised, and the gifted statues have been removed. Just as those with a religious tradition other than Christianity might see a public nativity display in ways that I can't imagine. When is a display self-expression, and when is it oppressive? Even something as neutral as a historical marker can have a political message as an undercurrent. There's a recent news story I learned about near Gettysburg, Pennsylvania this time, where there were 2 historical markers about the Confederate armies being in Pennsylvania. The original markers were placed there by the Daughters of the Confederacy, and celebrated the incursions and honored the Confederates who were killed. The revised markers didn't call it an incursion, they now called it raiding and burning and an invasion, which is what it was. The fact that the death of the Confederate soldiers is retained in the new markers wording, but the markers are no longer a monument in their honor. When theologians reinterpret Matthew's story of the bumbling Magi and the deaths they caused into one of international harmony, they may indeed be saying, Jewish children's lives do not matter. Or maybe that was the original plan. Maybe Matthew used the deaths of children to further glorify Jesus, to make Christ's claim as King of the Judeans more solid, and maybe he never felt any grief. Historians note that when Matthew was writing his gospel, there was a great deal of competition and animosity between the Jesus-following Jews and the rabbinic Jews. This can be seen in several other stories where Jewish leaders argue with Jesus, and Jesus wins and makes a fool of them. No one passage proves that Matthew was pushing an anti-Jewish agenda. We can, however, compare his selection of stories and how he tells them, to compare that to other gospel writers, and see in that comparison a pattern of bias. I find that opening my mind to seeing patterns is a way to work for liberty and justice for all. It complicates things that I thought were so simple. My point today is to be aware of influence in stories and in our shared environment. Even if you think you agree with the ends, see how the method can be oppressive. Does a lawyer who argues for expansion of gun ownership freedom bear any responsibility for mass shootings? Does the developer of a social media platform have any responsibility when its algorithms are used to stir up violence or child abuse or death or false rumors? Whatever the intent, I believe we must at least recognize the outcome. And we are even being asked to consider our own processes, our own structures, and how they work to exclude, work to marginalize, or make unwelcome groups of people. I don't say throw it out, but how might we be open to ways that make it better? How can discovering better ways of being help our community? How can we be open to transformation, examining the outcomes and set new intents? I think this Christmas story tells us, through its sadness, that even wise astrologers, magicians, can contribute to tragedies. The Magi weren't evil characters. Well, history agrees that King Herod was an evil, power-hungry man. In the end, the interaction between the Magi and Herod slaughtered innocent lives. Now, there's nothing wrong with churches having Christmas pageants, children dressing up as kings or camels. But if we're wise, we will remember that there's more to the story. And as our children mature, we can fill out their understanding. The path of love is not single and direct. It leads us to always gain in awareness, always be willing to learn more and revise what we think we know. And the path of love is not a lonely path. Let us listen. Let us observe. Let us question together. Ours is a living tradition. Amen.
And now we'll go to our closing hymn. Our closing hymn is number 55, Dark of Winter. Carly, if you would play both verses.
Emily, you're muted.
Muted. Thank you. I did the entire thing on mute. Great. Well, that gives me the chance to share the PowerPoint. I'm going the other way. Why won't it go? Getting to the correct screen. Nope. Okay, we're gonna stop trying to do that because it's fighting with me. So now is the time that we can extinguish our chalice flame. And if you all remember the words, you can say them with me. We extinguish our chalice flame, but not the light of wisdom, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts and in our hands until we are together again.
Our benediction are the words of Dr. Howard Thurman. He got it right when he wrote, "When the song of the angel is stilled, when the star in the sky is gone, when the kings and princes are home, when the shepherds are back with their flocks, the work of Christmas begins. to find the lost, to heal the broken, to feed the hungry, to release the prisoner, to rebuild the nations, to bring peace among us, to make music in the heart. Amen. And thank you, Carly and Emily. And I'm thankful that all of you visited today.
Well, thank you for visiting.